Good morning and welcome to Calvary this morning. I greet each of you in the name of Jesus this morning. As you see in the bulletin, the sermon text this morning is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if there's some here who, especially in light of the Sunday school lesson, are expecting a marriage sermon this morning. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not a fan of taking things out of context. And that is, while chapter 13 is applicable somewhat to marriage, that is not the context within that Paul was writing it within. Chapter 12, he speaks of the spiritual gifts and continues on with spiritual gifts in chapter 14. So he's writing in context of the church, addressing issues at the church of Corinth. And so, as an introduction to chapter 13, I am going to start reading in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 31, and then I will continue through chapter 13. He uses the words, a still more excellent way, as he switches from chapter 12 into chapter 13. So let's start reading 1 Corinthians 12, verse 31. But earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So I'd like to break this passage up this morning into three sections. The first section is verses 1 through 3. And I've titled that section, All is Nothing Without Love. The second section will be verses 4 through 7. And that is looking at the characteristics of love. And then lastly, verses 8 through 13. And that section will be titled, Love is Eternal and the Greatest. So as we start in here, like I said earlier, this is in context of the church. Paul is addressing spiritual gifts and some of the chaos in the Corinthian church relating to them, especially speaking in tongues. And he was trying to bring order and put these gifts in their right place. And so we find this in here as Paul's direction to the Corinthians as they relate with each other. And to the children this morning, I had three phrases I used with them, using love in different ways. I think I said I like pizza, or I love pizza, I love Volkswagens, and I love my wife. And I asked them, I said, does that mean the same thing? And they were quick. They said, no, it doesn't mean the same thing. And so before we dig into that this morning, we need to define this word love that's used here this morning. Our English language is great, but love means a lot of things in today's world. So The Greek word that is used here is agape, and I think we're all familiar with that. It's often referred to as the highest level of love that's used throughout the Bible. And it is not just simply a matter of being friendly. It is not that easy. It is the type of love that God has towards us, and I think we can often think of it that way and think as humans that we are incapable of agape love. But I'd like to read from John 3, chapter 19. The verse says this, "And this is the judgment, the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil." The word loved that's used for people love the darkness rather than the light, that is the word agape. And so as humans, we do have the ability to have agape love, and it is for sin and for darkness that we have that ability. And so as we think of this word love this morning, picture someone who is unable to break that power of sin in their life. They have that agape love for sin and for darkness, and because of that, they are willing to sacrifice much of the good things in their life for that sin. So think of that as well as we, imagine a world where we are, where we love and sacrifice for each other in the same way that a sinner is willing to give up so much in order to stay in darkness and stay in sin. So in summary, agape love can be defined as a sacrificial, giving, absorbing kind of love. The word has little to do with emotion, but it has much to do with self-denial for the sake of another. And I want to insert here that we can have self-denial for selfish reasons, but agape love is self-denial for the sake of others. Often we're tempted to give up ourselves, deny ourselves for a little bit because we know we'll look better down the road. Our hearts are still selfish. We're concerned with our self-image. Rather, agape love denies self permanently without recognition for the sake of another. So with that, let's move into the beginning of the chapter in verse 1. This first section, Paul lays out, kind of gives us a picture of a couple of different kinds of people, all doing great things. The first image he gives us is someone who can speak with the tongues of men and of angels. And you say, what does that mean? And as I thought of that, I got the picture of someone who's an excellent communicator. They have the ability to communicate with every living being, not only in this realm, but also in the spiritual realm. That's an incredible gift to be able to communicate in that way. But Paul says even with that gift, if you don't have love, it is nothing. You're nothing more than a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I don't know about you, but when I hear those words, I tense up just hearing the words. It's empty, annoying noise. It's an excellent source of hypertension. And so I have a quote here from a man named Joshua Gregory. He says this: "People of little religion are always noisy. He who has not the love of God and man filling his heart is like an empty wagon coming violently down a hill. It makes great noise because there is nothing in it." And I think that's true. If you have a wagon that's full, it doesn't rattle, but there's nothing makes more racket than an empty wagon coming down a hill. And so, there are people who can be gifted communicators, but if they are not willing to fully commit that gift to the use of the kingdom and to the benefit of others, they often tend to use that gift to benefit themselves. They tend to manipulate people into fulfilling their own desires rather than using their gift to make people feel understood and cared for. The next picture that Paul gives us here, he uses the word prophetic powers and understanding all mysteries and knowledge. So we get the picture that this is a person who is essentially all-knowing. And in our society today, we tend to view knowledge, understanding, and insight into the future as kind of the ultimate package, the ultimate combination. and rightly so. One person with these kind of capabilities, he's going to be wealthy and powerful. And you say, well, why? If one was all-knowing and had a little bit of picture into the future, he's going to do great at the stock market, and people are going to come to him for all kinds of advice. But again, Paul says, even with that, if you don't have love, you are nothing. And so there again, if we're not using our spiritual gifts for the sake of others' benefit, then they are worthless. And the last picture he gives us is someone with miraculous faith, faith that's big enough to move mountains. Essentially, someone who has the ability to have miraculous things done at the snap of their finger. And two quotes I gleaned here. First one is, what good is it to be able to move a mountain if you set it down in someone else's path, or even worse, directly on top of them? And the second quote here is a quote from a man named Gordon Fee, who ironically was a Pentecostal preacher. And this is what he has to say. Possession of the charismata is not the sign of the Spirit. Christian love is. So even as a Pentecostal, he realized that there was something greater than faith that is able to move a mountain. And then moving on, if I give away all I have, so someone who is extremely giving, gives all that he has, Paul says that is still nothing if you don't have love. And so a question I thought of is it possible to give all you have to the poor and still be selfish? It sounds ironic and, contradictory, but I believe that it is possible. You could give every last thing you have away and still be a selfish person. Rather than giving simply for the benefit of the poor person, we give to better our reputation and self-image. What we're doing may look good from others' perspective, but our heart is still selfish. And then lastly, Paul says, even if I give my body to be burned, it is nothing. And I think, I was thinking of other religions, the Muslim religion for sure, where giving of your body and your life is considered the ultimate sacrifice and that, shows ultimate dedication to one's religion, and also comes with a high reward in their mind. However, Paul says this, it's nothing. If you do it for your own sake, if you do it for your own glory, it means absolutely nothing unless it's done out of agape love towards God and towards others. And so as we look at this list, these images here that Paul gives us, there are a lot of extremes. And I don't think any of us here can claim to attain to even one of these. And so I had to think, what is his list? What is his point with this list of extremes? The thought of that and thinking of the Corinthians that he was addressing here, the Corinthians were trying to outdo each other in their spiritual abilities. And so Paul went to the extreme, and he said, even if you guys get to this point, if you don't have love, you're missing it. And going back to chapter 12, verse 31 there, he refers to this as a still more excellent way. And that is his calling us to a more excellent way. Rather than striving for superhuman capabilities, he's calling us to strive for a life of self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. Rather than trying to outperform others, we are to make the welfare of others our ultimate priority. And also, it's a call to focus on our hearts and why we do what we do, rather than simply focusing on what we do. I'd like to read from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. It says this: "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." And so, ultimately, what is in your heart is more important than your actions. Although your actions are important, but we as humans can tend to use good actions to try to cover for a heart condition. And if that's the case, the good actions that we're trying to do are of no value. And I'm going to read from 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. It says this, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." And so as I had to think of that and how, we can tend to judge other people or even judge ourselves by the actions. God is looking at the heart, and why we are doing things is as important as what we are doing. Moving into the second section there, verses 4 through 7, Paul lays out characteristics of love. There's quite a list, but I will move through them fairly rapidly. I have a few comments on some of them, but first one is patient. Love is patient. Another word can be used there is long-suffering. And the thought of the word long-suffering, it literally means what it sounds like. It's not only waiting for the benefit of somebody else, but it's also suffering while you wait. And I don't know about you, but I can find it easy to wait a little bit for my own sake. And I can suffer a little bit if I'm waiting for something for myself. But it's pretty hard for me to wait and suffer for the sake of somebody else. Love is kind. The Greek definition here gives the idea of showing oneself useful, so thoughtful or useful actions. It does not envy, and I'm going to borrow some definitions here from Google for these next several. Definition here is a feeling of discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. Love does not boast. That means to talk with excessive pride and self-satisfaction about one's achievements, possessions, or abilities. Love is not arrogant. King James uses the words puffed up. I like that. It gives the idea of a swollen head. Google's definition here is having or revealing an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities. Love is not rude. King James again uses the words doth not behave itself unseemly, or does not act in a way that is out of place for a setting. It's in tune with what's going on around itself and will respond accordingly. Love does not insist on its own way. This needs no explanation, but is equally convicting. Love is not irritable. Again, King James is not easily provoked. And definition there is having or showing a tendency to be easily annoyed or made angry. Love is not resentful. Resentful is defined as feeling or expressing bitterness or indignation at having been treated unfairly. King James is thinketh no evil. And to think of that, it's kind of, responding in a way that is hurtful. It's not even an option. And then does not rejoice at wrongdoing. And I want to borrow from Proverbs here again, chapter 24, verse 17. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and let not your heart be glad when he stumbles. Our natural human response, when we hear of someone else's sin or misfortune, it's easy for us to immediately think of how we're going to gain from the situation. And sadly, I can find myself there at times. Love rejoices in the truth. In today's world we find ourselves in, it's often we feel like we are caught between needing to choose truth and needing to choose love. However, love does not avoid or deny the truth. It rejoices in it. As I think about that and how more often than not, when we dance around the truth, thinking we are being loving and gracious, in reality, in the long run, we are being unloving. If you truly love yourself, or if you truly love someone, your heart's desire will be for that person to fully know and live in the truth. And as I thought about Jesus, and if you look through his ministry, multiple times he has harsh words for the Pharisees, extremely harsh. And I think we asked the question, is Jesus unloving? And I think we can all answer that without thinking too long. No, he was not. And so what was his intent with his harsh words for the Pharisees? I think his intent was he saw the hearts of the Pharisees, and he desired that they would see the true condition of their hearts as well. And he used his harsh language to try to get them to see that. Does that mean I can speak the same way? I don't think so. My humanity would probably get in the way, and I don't think I could say what Jesus said to the Pharisees out of a completely pure heart, wanting the Pharisees' best. And I think also Jesus had the ability to fully and clearly see the hearts of the Pharisees, and we as people do not have that. While we may get glimpses at the hearts of other people and even at our own hearts, we never can truly know the heart of someone else. Love bears all things. The Greek definition here is to put a roof over or to cover with silence. And bears all things. We see this phrase used here over the next three characteristics of love. And yeah, Paul doesn't give us a whole lot of wiggle room here. Dug into the Greek, and guess what it means in the Greek? It means all things. I'm sorry, I can't let you off the hook here this morning. It doesn't say most things. Not much room for us to talk our way out of it. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 22. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. And I don't think that Jesus literally meant 77 times here, but rather was implying that we forgive indefinitely. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. And so we see that Peter kind of affirming that idea of love puts a roof over and is willing to forgive and cover sins. Love believes all things. So what does this mean? Does it mean that we just blindly believe everything we say because we need to love a person? We can't question anything. The Greek here gives the idea of to have faith in or credit. And I was thinking about that. We hear the word credit a lot in our day. Usually refers to the financial world. And so I was just thinking about this in relation to love and love believing all things. I had to think of a banker. And just as a banker extends credit to a loan applicant, we extend credit to people that we are in relationships with. There are only a few, if any, banks who are willing to take on a risky loan. And we tend to be the same way, naturally, with risky people. We give their word little to no credit. However, love extends credit to a person even when that person may not be worthy of credit. I think it's important to remember here as well that love also rejoices in the truth. So love does not blindly believe somebody just so that individual feels loved. Love wants to believe, but it is also discerning, because love needs to believe all things, but also rejoice in the truth at the same time. However, love will continue to believe until the contrary evidence appears. So love has the intent to want to believe rather than the intent of distrust from the start. Love is that high-risk banker who is willing to see past the blinding risk of a loan in hopes that not only will the loan be repaid, but also that something great may come from it. And he doesn't do this in a way that is just kind of blind, haphazard, just sure, yeah, I'll sign the loan, no big deal. No, he calculates and understands the cost that he could incur personally, but he is willing to see past that and is willing to take the risk of signing to the loan for the sake of the applicant. And I think in the same way, love does that to other people. It is willing to see past the risk of believing somebody and possibly being wrong for the sake of that individual. Love hopes all things. It's always hopeful, and that is harder than it sounds. Not going to lie, I find myself in situations sometimes where it feels like there's no hope for someone or for a situation. But love continues to have hope. It always anticipates the best for others rather than assuming the worst. Love endures all things. This has the idea of perseverance, indicates a dedication no matter how difficult things may get. And have you ever just thrown your hands up in the air and said, I can't take this anymore, it's too much, can't do it? Happened to me a couple weeks ago, and thankfully I was dealing with a car and not with an individual. But I think if we're honest, it can, we can get there in relationships. We just want to throw our hands up and say, this is too much. But love says, this is hard, but I will persevere and continue loving, even if it is extremely difficult and costly. And the last one, and this will kind of be a bridge into our last section, but love never ends. So as we look at this list and go down through it, the majority of these characteristics are action items. They're things we can do, they're things we can focus on. And so my question this morning for us is, Paul simply calling us to emulate this list? Does he want us to go down through here and just check the box every day? I didn't do that. Well, I did that one kind of today, but it wasn't bad enough not to check it. Is that what he's after, or is it something deeper than that? And I'd like to say this morning that it goes deeper than just the actions. This agape love, these characteristics, they will flow from a heart that is pure and that is free from selfish motives. I think it's possible. It's going to take a lot of work, but I do think it's possible to simply emulate that list, but still have a selfish heart. And if that's the case, the people that we are trying to love are going to feel that sooner or later. It may take time. But I think if we're simply trying to just copy and paste that list into our life, people around us will sooner or later sense that. God knows our hearts, and if our hearts are selfish, we do not truly have love, and our actions will mean nothing. The last section, verses 8 to 13. I don't think we'll spend a whole lot of time here. I do have a little more time here this morning than I anticipated. But Paul starts there in verse 8 by saying love never ends. Prophecies, tongues, and knowledge, he lists there, are all temporary. They will pass away. And I think ultimately that'll be in heaven. As I'm thinking about that, there'll be no need for prophecies, no need for tongues, and no need for knowledge in heaven. We'll be in eternity in the presence of the all-knowing God. We won't need glimpses into the future because we will be in heaven in a perfect world. We won't need tongues or languages. And also knowledge. We'll be there with God. And it's just, they will pass away. And then Paul continues in verses 9, 10 10, 11, and 12, talking about the partial. We know in part, we prophesy in part. When the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. So again, a picture of eternity and what we know today passing away. And yeah, the knowledge that we have now is partial. We do not know everything, and we can't see the whole picture. And so while prophecies and knowledge are helpful and necessary to us here in this life, however, they will dim and disappear when we enter heaven. And then verse 11, has always kind of intrigued me. I've was wrestling with how does that fit into this chapter, and what light does it have to shed on this topic for us. Verse 11 says this: "When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways." And so I think what Paul was trying to get us to look at here was kind of a shift in thinking. And so, when you think of a child, sometimes their way of thinking is not entirely accurate. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, when I was a child and the thoughts of, I can't wait to grow up, can't wait to be an adult. That's going to be where it's at. That's going to be great. And, the older I get, kind of the more often I stop and I watch a child and I say, man, I want to be a child again. And so, what happened there? And I think what happened was, as a child, my view of maturity and adulthood was misperceived and misunderstood. And I think Paul's bringing this verse in here to kind of, make us think in spiritual terms, do we have a proper view of spiritual maturity? The Corinthian church was striving for these spiritual gifts. They were trying to climb the ladder. They were pushing and shoving each other to prove who was best, to try to get to the top. And that was their view of spiritual maturity. And Paul says, no, that's not right. You're being spiritual children by acting like that. And he was calling them to be spiritual adults who are willing to give selflessly without recognition for the sake of each other. And then he ends the chapter here in verse 13 by saying, "So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love." And so why is love the greatest? And I think it's kind of a summary of the last section there, is love is the greatest because it is the only one of those three that will last into eternity. We will no longer need faith. We will no longer need hope in glory. But love will be a permanent part of our existence throughout all of eternity. And so that is the reason it is the greatest. There's also the only one of these that is an attribute of God. God is love. That is part of who he is. God does not need faith or hope, and neither will we in eternity. And so my sermon title was a bit of a question, and hopefully one that was easy for you to answer. And so as we've gone through this, the question was foundational or optional? I'd like to read from 1 John 4, verses 7 to 8 to answer that question. "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." So John says it's extremely foundational. So we think about this and the high calling that it is, and the reality that on our own human condition, this is impossible. What is the source of this agape love from which we are called to have or to show to each other? I think, first of all, the most important thing that we need to realize is that we must receive and experience God's agape love for us, first of all. Not only on a head level, but also on a heart level. And out of that, the more we experience the reality of God's love at a heart level, the more agape love we will have for others. And I think if we view our relationship with God as simply a performance, as the Corinthians did, we will struggle to grasp the reality of his love for us. And I'd like to venture to say this morning that you can only love others to the extent that you have experienced love yourself. And so I want to challenge us this morning to rest in God's love. Allow yourself to experience his love deep into your heart and rest in that. Don't view your relationship with God as a performance where you need to do this list of loving things so God will love you. No, God has agape love for you. He sent his Son to die for you. Rest in that and allow your love for others to come out of that relationship, out of that love that you have experienced from God. And so, as a closing challenge here this morning, as we think about what we do and our heart behind it, and the heart being the important part, I want to encourage each of us to take some time this week to stop, to sit in silence, and to be like David, who asked God to search his heart and ask God to reveal your heart to you. David said this in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And so I think it's easy for us to deceive ourselves about the true condition of our heart, our true motives. And so it's out of that we ask God to reveal that to us. And so, my challenge is to ask God daily to reveal to you your true motives. Lean on him and his love, and let your actions flow out of that. I'll close with John 13, 34 and 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Thank you for your time. Ivan, can we have a song?